Let me just say, for those of you that don't know me, many of you I've met before. My name's David Church, as Cameron says. I'm an attorney. I represent cities and towns and have done so since 1980. I've been the League's general counsel, as he said, for several years now. It's been a wonderful client to have, wonderful opportunity to do this. I've been asked to talk about three basic things: powers and duties, ethics, and open meetings. But when I do presentations, I don't use a PowerPoint. I don't use the computer. I like to have it interactive. At any time, if you have a question that you think's on point of what I'm talking about, you raise your hand, ask the question. The only thing that I ask is that you let me know what community you're from so that I can put the question in context and give you an answer that actually applies to what I think your question is. I'm happy to be interrupted. You won't get me off screens. You won't get me off track if I am on a track at the time you ask it. As I said, I've represented cities and towns for a long time now. I'm happy to represent cities and towns and townships. I'm going to say cities and towns. We have municipalities represented in the body, and Utah municipalities include cities, towns, and metro townships. For those of you outside Salt Lake County, there is a thing that's like a town, it's like a city. It is a municipality, and sometimes we forget to include them. I see Mayor from the Immigration Canyon Metro Township there. I know them, I think Magna or White City Metro Townships here, but they're all municipalities. When I say cities, if I slip into that, I mean all of you. If I say cities and towns, I mean all of you. If I say just townships, I mean just townships. If I say just towns, I may mean just towns. But they're all municipalities, they're all in the municipal code, they're all do very similar things. They're interesting. They're interesting to me because municipalities, cities and towns, townships are in a sense voluntary bodies, if you think about it. None of us have to live in an incorporated municipality. It's a choice. You have no choice if you live in Utah but to live in a county. You can't opt out, carve out your own little place and say, I'm not in a county. You can't opt out and not be in the state. But you can opt out and not be in a city and town. People live in them by choice, and the place they live is a choice. No one forced you to live in the community you live in. You chose that at some time. Unless, of course, you're married to my wife, and then perhaps it was a different choice. But it's a voluntary organization. The way we're set up in Utah is this: the Utah Constitution requires the legislature to provide for municipal corporations. And the legislature has done that by enacting what we call the municipal code, Title 10. In that section of the state law, in that municipal section, it lays out your form, function, and powers and duties. The legislature lays that out because they have to under the state constitution. So they have provided a system by which communities can incorporate into a form of government. And that incorporation is a voluntary choice at some time. There are many wonderful communities in the state of Utah that have existed since pioneer times that have never chosen to incorporate. Morgan County has one incorporated city, but you drive through Morgan. You drive through Morgan County, though, and you might go through Stoddard or Peterson or the other enterprise. You'll see Mountain Green. They've never, for whatever reason, chosen to incorporate. Only Morgan did. Cache County must have 20 incorporated cities. In Salt Lake County, we have a brand new incorporated city, Brighton. Brighton's existed since pioneer days and just now chose to incorporate. So why? Why do people choose to live in your city or town? Why do some communities choose to incorporate and some don't? Why is Gunlock not incorporated but Apple Valley is? I think, from my experience, there's three reasons why we exist. The first is we exist because our communities were incorporated because someone saw a need for a service that could be provided to the group better than it could be provided on an individual basis. We incorporated some places over a water system because of the need for a fire system, because of the need for parks even. First and foremost, primarily, we exist to provide services to people. We're the government that provides the clean water in the morning and takes the dirty water away. We build the streets, we plow the streets. We allow parking on the streets or we don't allow it. We're the ones that quiet barking dogs. This morning I got up in South Jordan and brushed my teeth with water from the tap because I knew it was safe. I put my garbage out on the curb on Wednesday morning and it disappeared. I drove up here to North Salt Lake and felt pretty sure that the roads were going to be safe to drive on. Because why? Because South Jordan did their job, North Salt Lake did their job, and the cities in between did their job. Number one reason we exist is just that. We provide services to the group that they can't provide on their own. Now, the second reason that communities incorporate, that we exist, is almost as important in my mind. There's a need to create and preserve a sense of community. Everyone needs a place to be from and a place to go home to. I was born in Panguitch. I was raised in Murray. I spent 20 years in Salt Lake, and now I've spent 20 years in South Jordan. I feel like my hometown is Murray. I still worry about what Murray High School does in football. When an article about Murray is in the newspaper, I read it. Why? Because I feel like it's my hometown. I worry. Now, my father spent most of his adult life in Murray, being a school teacher, but he was born in Panguitch. When he retired from the school district, he went home to Panguitch. Why was he able to do that? Because people like you preserved that sense of community, preserved the hometown. Somebody has built that in Murray for me and is preserving it now. Somebody built it for my father in Panguitch and is preserving it now. That's what we do. We build and preserve that sense of community. Anybody know where Crescent is? It isn't. It's a cemetery. Why? No one ever preserved that sense of community. Why does Harriman exist? Harriman incorporated in the middle of the 80s because they didn't want to be Riverton. That's why they incorporated. Someone once said the West Haven should be called Not Roy. Isn't that right? And there's an incorporation petition going now up in West Weber County with a bunch of old pioneer communities. I forget their names, whether Taylor. Yeah, they want to incorporate. Why? They don't, not because they feel a need for services perhaps, but because they want to protect and preserve their sense of community. They want to build a hometown that somebody can go home to. Now, the third reason that people incorporate is, to me, the least important, but it's a common one. They want to be in charge. If somebody's going to zone us, it wants to be us. If someone's going to tell me what to do, I want it to be my neighbors. I'm tired of the county telling me what to do. Those are basically the three reasons. As I say, that third reason is, to me, the least important, but it's a common one. First and foremost, we're there to provide services. Second, we build and preserve that sense of community. And third, we want to be in charge. We want to govern. And let me just say, when you drive to Cedar City, they have a sign outside. It says, Cedar City, home of the Shakespeare Festival, the festival city. It doesn't say, home of the good zoning ordinance. Why? Because the fun is in providing the services and building the community. Yes, we had a question.
Well, just curious, so it sounds like you're unincorporated, you can get a petition together and become incorporated. Can if someone, and I'm just curious because I'm just trying to get a handle on this, can someone within an incorporated area decide, we want to incorporate a smaller area within that?
No. You can't create a city within a city. You can't carve out a new piece. But by the way, there are some communities over time have chosen to not incorporate, to disincorporate. Apple Valley incorporated, held a vote not to incorporate, it was close. Castle Valley or Castledale, the one by Moab, they've held 2 or 3 elections, Castle Valley. Bluff was incorporated, disincorporated, now reincorporated. But you can't carve out a part of a city and incorporate within a city. Okay, so that's why we're here. Let's talk about the form, function, and powers and duties of your local government. As I say, the legislature creates your form, function, and powers. You don't have any independent ones. They're not God-given. They're not old English common law. They're not the Constitution of the United States that gives you your powers. It's not even the Constitution of this state that gives you your powers, your form, your function. It is the Utah State Legislature that lays out your form, function, and powers. In Utah, the legislature has set out 4 basic forms of municipal government that are possible right now. They are the mayor-council form, the 6-member council form, the 5-member council form, and the metro township form of government. They're all slightly different. There is also another form of government that still exists in the state of Utah that's called the city manager form of government. That's a form that I'll talk about in a minute. Yes, there was a question.
Please say all those again, Ron.
Yes, I'll say them several times. She says I'm talking too fast. I always wanted to be a fast-talking, sharp guy,
Well, you're doing it.
I will slow down. Okay, let me tell you the difference between those forms of government. First, mayor-council form of government. That form of government mimics the state and federal system. It's a form of government where you have an executive branch and a legislative branch. The executive branch consists of the mayor. West Jordan City is a brand new mayor-council form of government. We got the new mayor here. They just changed to that form of government from the old city manager form of government. Salt Lake City is the mayor-council form of government. Logan, Ogden, South Salt Lake, Taylorsville, Murray, Provo, Marriott Slaterville, maybe. Sandy, I forgot Sandy. Those are your mayor-council forms of government. It mimics the state and federal system, as I said. It's the government you learn about in the civics class. It is a divided government. It is checks and balances. The council is the legislative body. The mayor's office is the executive and administrative body. The mayor does not sit as a member of the council. The council chooses its own chair. The mayor has a specific set of statutory duties that cannot be taken from the mayor by the council. The legislature gives them to him. They're his or her duties. The council has its duties as a legislative body and a council. That's the mayor-council form of government. You only have that form of government if at one time in your history your electors held an election, your voters held an election and voted to do it. The only way you could become that form of government is, as West Jordan just recently did, put it on the ballot and hold a vote. 6-member council form of government. 5-member council form of government. That's the form of government that most of you have. The 6-member council form of government is a form where there is not branches. There's not an executive branch. There is not a legislative branch. It is government by committee. It is the old traditional city kind of local government. It's similar to a school board. It's similar to a county commission. It is a committee. One of the committee is the mayor. The rest of the committee are council members. There are not branches. The mayor, however, in the 5- and 6-member council form of government, has individual powers set out in the state municipal code. The mayor is the chair of the council. Unlike the mayor-council form, the council doesn't choose their own chair. the mayor is the chair. You run for the position of mayor, you're a member of the council. The 5-member council form of government is the same, only there's only 4 council members and a mayor. The difference between the 6 and the 5-member council form of government is that in the 6-member council form of government, the mayor votes only in cases of a tie and on some very specific issues dealing with the mayoral power. In the 5-member council form of government, the mayor votes on every issue. Then we have the metro township form. It's the 5-member council form, but the mayor does not run for a seat as mayor. The mayor runs as a council seat. The council chooses their mayor. And so Joe Smolk is here. He's the mayor of Immigration Canyon Metro Township. His council voted to make him mayor. He chairs, he votes, similar to the 5-member council. Come January, under their ordinances, the council will decide whether to change the mayor out or leave the mayor in. Other metro townships might do it on a different cycle. Metro townships can only exist in Salt Lake County, and only if there's an election creating the metro township. So the basic forms again, mayor-council form mimics the state and federal system. Separation of powers. Mayor is the executive. Council is the legislative body. 5, 6-member council in the metro township form, government by committee. Mayor chairs, mayor sits on the committee, mayor has certain voting rights. Now there is represented in the room, and in Salt Lake County and other places, a legacy kind of form of government. It's what's called the city manager form of government. That form is an old form that mimics the corporate system. It mimics business. In that form, the council is elected, similar to a board of directors by the shareholders. The council then hires a chief executive that's called a city manager. The city manager is not an elected office. The city manager is the chief executive. The council is legislative only. The mayor in those forms of government is a ceremonial mayor only, chairs the council, votes as a full member of the council. So the city manager form of government exists in Bryan Head Town, West Valley City, Holiday, Cottonwood Heights, Orem. I think I've got them all. Now, I already know that some of you are saying, wait a minute, we have a city manager or we have a city administrator. That may be true, but you don't have the city manager form of government. You cannot have the city manager form of government unless your voters held an election sometime in the past, and currently you could not opt to go to that city manager form of government. Any questions so far? Have I confused any of you on the form of governments that any of your cities have? Because I'm happy to answer them. Yes, sir. What city are you from?
Willard City.
Willard City.
So what's the difference on the legacy form for a city administrator if you're part of that or if you're not?
He asked the question that everybody should ask. What's the difference then between the legacy form city manager and those of us who have a city manager or city administrator? Under the 5 and 6 member council forms of government, the legislature has recognized that we're not all the same. Hey Cam, could you get me a glass of water or something? That we're not all the same. So they've given you 6-member council forms and 5-member council forms and to some extent metro township forms of government. They've given you a bunch of options. So the way to think about it is this. The legislature for those forms has laid out default settings. So it's like when you went to go and buy a new laptop or iPad or whatever you buy, and you turn it on, and it has a bunch of default settings. And you can just ignore that and leave it that way and live up with that forever, or you can change those defaults, and there's a bunch of options available for you. In the 6-member and 5-member council forms of government, thank you. In the 6-member and 5-member council forms of government, the default setting, if you do nothing, what the legislature says is, the default setting is mayor is the chief executive and administrative officer to whom all employees will report. Mayor's duties are to carry out the policies of the council. Mayor's duties are these. But one of the options the legislature has given in the 6 and 5-member council form of government is council can, by ordinance, create the position of city manager or city administrator, and the council in that ordinance can delegate some or all of the mayor's administrative and executive powers to this individual called city manager or city administrator. In order for that to happen, the ordinance has to be agreed to by the mayor. The mayor gets to vote on that, and a majority of the council has to vote on it, or if the mayor does not agree, it has to be a unanimous council. Any ordinance that's already in existence, that was already in existence when the legislature made their last change in 2008, continued in existence. So, you guys who are newly elected have not been given a new computer or a new iPad. The default settings have been changed in every community, and they're changed differently in every community. So your city administrator in Willard has a set of powers that are laid out in your ordinance. That's different from the set of powers for the city administrator of Pleasant Grove. Probably, yes.
The reason why I asked that question is our city does not have a city administrator, but it appears that that's probably where it's headed.
So, the reason why he says his city doesn't yet have a city administrator, and it looks like where it's headed. The reason why the legislature has given those your cities and towns that much discretion is they recognize, look, not every mayor who is elected mayor is capable of doing the job. Not every mayor who is elected mayor wants to do the job. Not every city council has the trust of the has trust in the mayor. There has to be a conflict resolution mechanism in those cities in the 5 and 6 member council form of government because it's government by committee. And if the committee decides to do something and the only one person on the committee who has the power to carry it out is the mayor refuses to do it, how do you resolve the conflict? So one of the ways you resolve that conflict, or have been resolved that conflict in the past in the 5 and 6 member council forms of government, is the council would create the position of city administrator or city manager, hire this city administrator or city manager, and say, Mayor, you're welcome to come to the meetings, you're welcome to kiss the babies, you're welcome to cut the ribbons, but when it comes to the day-to-day operation of this community, we're going to hire a professional. Now, the difference between that and the legacy city manager form of government is the legacy city manager form of government, the duties of the manager are laid out in the old state code. The council can hire and fire the manager, but can't take away his duties. You can't get rid of it without a vote of the people, and the duties are set out. In the 5 and 6 member council form with this optional city manager form or optional thing, the duties can be tailored to fit your situation. Questions on that? Yes, sir. What city?
So, Park City,
Park City has a manager under an ordinance.
that's what I figured, under an ordinance, so that would be similar to the 6-member, but it is the legacy version.
No,
correct?
Park City is the 6-member council form of government with the city manager with an ordinance. Now, in order to change that ordinance, you need a unanimous council or a vote of the council, a majority of the council with the mayor's consent. To take power away from the mayor or give power back to the mayor in the 5 and 6 member council forms of government and the Metro Township form of government, you need the consent of the mayor or a unanimous council. Yes, sir.
Tooele City,
Tooele City, I'm glad you asked. Tooele is special. in many ways. Tooele is one of my favorite places, but they're special. And the rest of you ought to learn about it because it is an option we don't talk about much. The Constitution of the state of Utah provides for another way to form your government other than just trusting the state legislature. You can create a charter, your own constitution, your own municipal code. It's a process that's fairly elaborate, requires the vote of the people. There are some constraints, but you can create your own form of government. Tooele is the only charter city in the state of Utah. Ogden used to be, but they gave up their charter decades ago. Tooele's charter is special to Tooele. It creates a form very much like the mayor-council form of government with some slight differences. But in Tooele, branches of government, mayor's the executive, council is the legislative branch. In Tooele, however, the council could not create a city administrator or city manager by ordinance because they're not under that section of the state code. I'd have to read their charter to see if they could. But Tooele has its charter. It's the only one in the state. Anything that I say about forms of government, Tooele gets to ignore. And then I read their charter, it reminds me, and we talk about it then. Yes?
What are the pros and cons of having a charter?
The pros and cons is, let's say you wanted to recreate the Council of 50 and be creative on your own government, you could do a charter. But the cons are, it's hard work, takes elections, and if you want to change it, you have to hold a vote to change it. Tooele went through an amendment to the charter, 4 or 5 or 10 years ago maybe or something. It's difficult to change. Less flexibility. But no one has taken the charter path in this century or last century. I think as I said, the last one is Tooele. Yes, sir.
West Haven, I'm wondering if the council decided that they did want to have a city manager, but the mayor is in charge of hiring, how does that work?
Excellent question. West Haven asks if the council decides that they need a city manager and the mayor's in charge of hiring, how does it work? The way it works is if you create that city manager by ordinance, over the objection of the mayor or even with the mayor's consent, the ordinance is going to say the manager or administrator is hired by the council as a group. Now, some of them in compromises say, look, we're going to have one, but we'll let you appoint with advice and consent. But if some of them are very aggressive and say, you can participate and vote on who it is, but we're going to decide as a group. And let me just say, over the years, that optional, the 5 and 6 member council forms, they start out small, they get bigger, they get more complicated, and eventually they decide they need professional help. And so the question always is, if we're going to hire a professional, who gets to make that decision? Who do the answer to? Council members like to have the answer to the whole council. Mayors like to say, I was elected mayor, the people think I'm in charge. If you're going to hire a professional to help me, I'm going to be in charge of them. Yes, sir.
Holiday City.
Yes.
Also, pros and cons of the legacy form, of the grandfather form, council manager.
You know, Holiday is very interesting to me because Holiday, when it was first created, Holiday was one of those pioneer communities who decided they needed to incorporate in the middle of the 80s, was it, or the 90s? It existed since pioneer days and felt like they needed to incorporate. I don't know if it was to preserve Holiday as Holiday or it's because they wanted to be in charge and they didn't trust the county anymore, but there was a reason. So Holiday incorporated. When they incorporated, the voters voted to incorporate as the mayor-council form, the strong mayor form. And the first mayor got along great with the council. And then the second mayor said, by the way, I ran for mayor and I know what the strong mayor form of government is, and I'm in charge, and you guys are council members. You can pass ordinances, you can pass the budget, but then get out of my way. And the council didn't like that thought, and there was conflict and fight, so the people spoke. The people said, we're tired of our government fighting with each other about who's in charge, and so they put on the ballot, they said to themselves, you know, that West Jordan across the valley seems to be run really well. And that West Valley seems to be run really well. We ought to have a city manager. And so they put on the ballot, let's go to the city manager form of government, and they changed And so they're the legacy city manager form. At the very same time across the valley, West Jordan, this was years ago, was fighting with their manager and their mayor. And they were saying, you know, that Salt Lake and Sandy, that's the way to go. And so they started the fight about moving from the city manager to the strong mayor form. We ought to have an elected chief executive. We ought to have a mayor who's in charge, not a ceremony mayor. So eventually West Jordan's now gone the other way. The pros and cons to me are these. First, the pros of what Holiday has is lots of people think the government ought to be run like business. If you believe that, then that city manager form is the form to go with. Because the way business is run is shareholders elect a board of directors hires a pro, the pro runs the company. And if the pro isn't running the company well, the board of directors, without waiting for an election, can get rid of the pro. The con is the public doesn't understand that. They think that the person with the title mayor ought to be in charge, that they ought to be able to vote for the chief executive, that some hireling shouldn't be making decisions, that some hireling shouldn't be running the business, that it's government, it ought to be elected chief executives. Now on the other side, the cons are the very same thing. You don't know who's going to be elected mayor, and some mayors are better than others, is a good way of putting it. And so in that strong mayor form, the choice you go to, you would get a mayor elected who can't handle it, who won't handle it. You got to live with them until you either drive them out of office by hounding them mercilessly, or you wait 4 years for the next election. Now, the best form for most of us that works out is the 5 and 6 member council form of government, because you have the flexibility to be like the city manager form or like the strong mayor form, depending on what you need. You can have a paid professional run it, or you can have the politicians run it, depending on what you need. And as you grow more sophisticated, you can change. Lehigh, when I first did work for Lehigh, was a farming community with mayor and council, 6-member form. The council and the mayor did everything. And now Lehigh's budget has got to be, what, $150 million a year total? They've got more paid professionals than AT&T. I mean, they couldn't run that with the volunteers. But over time, they changed. Now, during that change, they went to a period of time where the council said, Mayor, you are no longer smart enough to run this enterprise. We are going to get a city manager. And the mayor said, I am too smart enough. I got elected, and they had a big fight. They sued each other. And then in the end, they end up the way they are. Okay, any question about the form and the function? Let me talk about your positions. Those of you who are elected mayor, if you're in the mayor council form of government, you have a statutory set of powers and duties laid out by the state legislature. Number one on that list is you will carry out the policies and laws and ordinances adopted by the council. Council members, all of you who were elected to a council, the voters gave you one thing, and one thing only. That is the right to vote as the member of a committee. You have the right to have your say. You don't have the right to get your way. Mayor is there anybody, Mayor of Holiday is a council member, ceremonial mayor only. Mayor of a 5 and 6 member council form of government and metro township form of government has the statutory duties of a mayor, the default thing, unless they have been taken away. And if they have been taken away, you don't have them. That's the number one source of conflict that I've seen in my career representing cities and towns, is the who's in charge here now. Those of you who are not mayors and councils members weren't elected to any seat at all. You're hirelings. You do what you're hired to do, what the policies, ordinances are. Those of you who are elected to council were elected to council, not mayor. You stay in your lane. Those of you who are elected to be mayor were elected to be mayor and not God. You stay in your lane. Yes.
So in a 6 and 5-member form of government, and if the mayor is not available, say he's gone somewhere, who sits in his position?
Okay, question from Willard is, if the mayor in the 5 and 6 member council form of government is absent, not there, who takes over? The statute says that the council will choose a mayor pro tem to function the role of the mayor. In the mayor's absence, the mayor pro tem has to be a member of the council. Okay, let's talk a little bit, just to make sure everybody's clear on the mayor's right to vote. Mayor-council form of government, the mayor does not have a right to vote, does not sit on the council, does not chair the council. The mayor has a veto. It's like the president or the governor. The veto can be overridden by a vote of the council. Takes the 2/3 vote of the council to override it. 5 and 6 member council forms of government. 5-member council form of government, the mayor votes on every issue. No right to veto, though. 6-member council form of government. The mayor votes in cases of a tie and on ordinances to give or take away their power, and on who to hire or fire as the city manager. Metro Township form of government, the mayor votes on every issue. City manager legacy form, mayor votes on every issue. Any questions about that? Councils do their business as a body. Some council members may be delegated individual responsibilities by their mayor under the section. It's very common in the smaller cities and in all of our towns and in metro townships as well, that mayor may assign, with the advice and consent of the council, certain duties that look administrative or executive to council members. So I'm sure in Bigwater, every council member has a department. I'm sure, do we have other towns here? Fairview, every council member is assigned some area of responsibility, aren't they? Yes. That is unique to your community and towns. Whether you do that or not depends on whether the mayor and council want to do it that way. How you do it, how you're set up, what powers that council member administrator has depends on the community. There's no state law that says if you do that the council member can spend this much money or can't spend that or can hire or fire. That's unique to your own community and should be set out in your policies and procedures. Any questions about the council's role, the mayor's role? It's the fewest questions I've ever gotten. I remember years ago, I was in one of these meetings and we were talking about the city manager. And I looked down and there was someone raised their hand, and it was from a city that I was the city attorney for. I won't say what city. And the city manager was sitting there and a new councilwoman sitting there, and she raised her hand and her question was, Dave, I understand all that. My only question is, how do we fire one of those city managers? Now, it took her 6 years, but eventually she got it done. So I'm always surprised when we don't have the question. In the past, it has been the city manager by ordinance, and those cities, the city administrators. It has served as a way to professionalize administration and a dispute resolution mechanism. When councils and mayors in those forms of government come at loggerheads, there has to be a winner. And the winner is, if a unanimous council says the mayor's off the rails, there's a way that council can, like I say, geld the mayor, for those of you who come from the country. Yes?
West Haven City. Speaking of firing, how do you get rid of the planner, the city planner, or the attorney? I mean, I'm not saying I want to.
Let me just say, I'm not saying you want to either. But if there's...
Saying, like, is that the mayor? Does the mayor take care of that, or is that a council? Because those are...
Excellent question. It depends on your policies and procedures and how you're set up. Appointment and firing is one of the most difficult things. With all due respect to Judy Piquel, who's sitting here, who's a new Alpine City Council member, but one of the most renowned planners in the state of Utah. If there's anybody that needs to be gotten rid of, it's planners and attorneys. I mean, I can say that, but it depends on how your community's set up. In general, one of the powers of the mayor is, unless you've taken it away or reassigned it, is the mayor is the person to whom all employees report. The mayor is in charge of that, the day-to-day operations. The mayor, in theory, could hire and fire. The mayor appoints people to certain offices with the advice and consent of the council. And that's in all forms of government, depending on what the office is. The power to appoint is also the power to unappoint. But employees, depending on who they are, on what level, and that may have rights to their employment. There may be policies and procedures adopted by each city that says that they can or can't or how, or they may have contracts and things like that that limit that. But in general, unless you've got a policy that says only the council can decide, it would be whoever your chief executive officer is, administrator, executive, whatever, on the firing. The appointment may be with advice and consent. And for you council members, let me just tell you what advice and consent means. Advice and consent means mayor comes up with a name and says, I'm looking for your advice on whether this is a good enough person, and I'm looking for your consent, say yes or no. Advice and consent doesn't mean that you get to come up with your own names. It means that the mayor comes up with the names and you say yes or no. Now, some mayors will say, you know, it's easier, instead of fighting with you, I'll get input before I come to you. But they don't have to. It's advice and consent, like the president on Supreme Court judges and the Senate. It's, here's a name, you interview him, you talk about him, you give me advice, you say yes or no. Yes?
So if a council member and a mayor, if they don't get along, is there anything, because the mayor delegates or dictates over the positions that are hired, what about council members and mayors? Like, that nothing would...
The question is, if a mayor and a council member don't get along, what's the solution? How do we do it? Well, if a mayor and council doesn't get along, then there's a solution. If a mayor and a council member doesn't get along, there is no solution. Okay, let's talk about how we do the work. We've talked about the forms of government. Yes, sir.
Woodland Hills, since we're talking about hiring, nepotism.
Nepotism. There is a state nepotism law. The way it works is this, is you may not recommend, hire, supervise certain relatives. The relatives are defined. There are exceptions. The exceptions include part-time work, less than 12 weeks, and some other things that deal with job title things and all that. But in general, most communities, you may not recommend for employment any of the disqualifying relatives, which are basically your wives, your kids, your nephews, your aunts, your uncles, the typical relatives. Now, in towns, the definition of relative is narrow to exclude aunts and uncles and cousins, because apparently in towns we're all interrelated. And in communities that are less than 3,000 population, within 40 miles of each other on all-weather roads, it doesn't apply. And so in those communities, you can hire your extra wife for whatever you want to do on that. But that's basically it. Yes?
Harriman City, going back to your comment about gelded mares.
You know, the only reason why they geld them is because they're not worth breeding and they can't train them.
Can you clarify specifically, you talked about how the council unanimously voting with the mayor opposing can limit or take away certain duties or powers
Yeah.
from the mayor?
You're Hiram?
Is there a limit, Harriman?
Harriman.
Is there a limit to that? Or-
Yes.
I mean, I think the mayor is entitled to certain statutory.
Yeah, let me just say in Harriman, they have gelded that mayor. There's been a long, ongoing fight. It's been a big fight. There is a limit. The statutory limit is you may not take away the mayor's chairmanship of the council, his vote. Harriman's a 5-member council form of government. What they call is ex officio duties, which is a legal term meaning duties that he holds just because he has the title, such as sitting on the Council of Governments in Salt Lake County, marrying people, things like that. But other than that limitation, they can strip the mayor of all administrative and executive powers and give it to the city manager, and they have in Harriman. My first client, by the way, was Riverton City back in 1980. My second municipal client. 1980, the Riverton City Council hired me to fire their police department. Not one policeman, but the whole police department. It was one of the first ones in the county to get rid of their police department and contract with the county sheriff. And the city attorney, when the majority of the council wanted to do that, said, no, I'm not going to participate in that, so he quit. And the city administrator, Rich Woodworth, who some of you may know, went up to Tremont, he said, I'm not participating in that, I quit. And the mayor said, I'm not doing it. So I went out to Riverton as a young attorney in 1980. We passed a city manager ordinance and told old Lowell White, who was a very nice guy, feel free to come to the meetings, feel free to chair this, but we're hiring a city administrator who will carry out our policies, a city manager, and our first policy is we're going to fire this police department. And man, they fought about that for 4 or 5 years. And then eventually, they went through some election cycles. They hired me as the city attorney. 30 years later, maybe 27 years later, I was still their contract city attorney, and I was at a Riverton City Council meeting, and there was the agenda. Item number 6 on the agenda, should we have a city manager? Item number 8 on the agenda, should we have our own police department? 25 years they fought about that, with my help. Now they've gotten rid of me, a full-time in-house attorney, all that, and they've got their police department back, they've got a city manager. But yeah, you can take away almost everything except the mayor's right to chair the council, the mayor's right to vote, and the mayor's right to show up and say, I'm the mayor, let me cut this ribbon. Yes?
So going back to the advice and consent for hiring, is that a binding vote? I mean, if the whole council votes no?
No. Good question. Who wins on a council is her question, really. Okay, 5- and 6-member council form of governments, 3 yes votes wins. Quorum for you is 3 council members, including the mayor in the 5-member council form, not including the mayor in the 6-member council form. So 3 yes votes wins. 2 votes never wins.
So as the advice and consent for an employee, hiring an employee?
If your policies say all employees require the consent of the council or advice and consent, it would take 3 yes votes. Most employee hirings, regular employees don't come to the council, but in small cities, some of them do. Okay, 7-member council forms of government. 4 yes votes. Your quorum is a majority of the council. Yes, sir.
You said, 6-member, 2 council members, and the mayor is not a quorum.
2 council members and the mayor is not a quorum in the 6-member council form of government. In the 5-member council form of government, mayor and 2 is a quorum. Okay? So Harriman, mayor and 2 is a quorum. Alpine, mayor and 2 is not a quorum. Yes?
Not a specific issue, but Provo, from Provo, you talk about advice and consent and the consent part. What if council members want to remove a department head?
No choice under your form. Department heads are appointed in the strong mayor form, or what we call it, by the mayor with the advice and consent, and the mayor can get rid of them. Remember, in that form of government, you mimic the state and federal system. That executive branch is the executive branch. Now, you can have your own council employees, and I know Provo Council has some employees that just answer to the council. But the department head is an executive branch official, removable, not removable. It's just like Congress saying, President Trump, Attorney General Barr looks too pudgy on TV. Please get rid of him. The mayor would say, thanks for your advice, but no.
What about in the regular?
5- and 6-member council form? 5 and 6 member council form for all you mayors and that out there, 3 votes wins, and there's a way to get your way. And so if a mayor says, I'm keeping this department head, and the council says, no, you're not, eventually the council, if they want to be bullheaded enough and push it long enough, the mayor will lose. Because the dispute in the government by committee, the majority of the committee acting from a quorum will win every issue. In the mayor-council form where you have branches of government, it's checks and balances, and so you can't say one side's going to win and the other side's going to lose. You can say that they're going to bump heads. Yes?
So, quick question going to nepotism. Let's say, as a city council member, if I was assigned to be the advisor to the planning commission, the city council representative, is there a conflict if my wife or relative is on the planning commission per se?
Not per se. The nepotism thing deals with hiring, firing, not volunteers. There's exception for volunteers, and it deals with, do you supervise them or is it a paid job? All right. Yes?
Quick question from Town Manager.
Right here we're going first, because you guys have a speed trap and it makes all of us mad. So we'll go with this woman that I've been ignoring first. Yes?
I'm just curious,
Can we what?
can you geld a mayor in a strong mayor, strong council?
No. The only way, that's why people have that form of government, is to let the voters stay in charge. You can impeach possibly, but see how that's working out. Yes, sir, Manaway. By the way, it's the most beautiful setting ever. I cannot believe how pretty that place is, both winter and spring. When you round that corner and you see that lake, like, everybody ought to live in Manaway. Yes?
Well, thanks.
But they won't let them.
And you keep saying that if you have we have a 5-member.
Yes.
You keep saying that you have to have a quorum of at least 3 to vote.
Mayor and 2 is a quorum.
Mayor and 2 is a quorum, but then you also say that you have to have 3 to.
Exactly.
So if you have 2 to vote yes, or 2 to vote no, and 2 to vote yes, or vice versa.
Doesn't pass. Nothing passes without 3 yes votes.
Okay. So
2 to 1 never
what do you
wins.
do?
2 to 1 never wins, except if you had a council member who had died or vacated the position, and you're voting to fill that position, and that you only had 3 on the council. Then 2 to 1 wins. But in no other situation, 3 yes votes are required. Yes.
Layton City,
Yes.
back to the mayor, or the city manager, and how do you change the duties if you can of the mayor and city manager? And back to the example that was given of, say, one get rid of department head or something like that.
The way you change the duty of the mayor or city manager in the 6-member council form like Layton has is you amend your ordinances that lays out those duties. Other than, obviously, you, depending on what you want to do. So you could repeal the city manager ordinance, give them all back to the mayor, give them the statutory duties, or something less or something more than that. But it would take a unanimous vote of the council or the consent of the mayor and a majority of the council. Okay, let's talk about what you can do. Now we've talked about how you can do it. But let's talk about your powers. You guys are powerful people. Your government. You get to intrude in people's personal business, and you get to compel people to do what they don't want to do. You have the power to make laws. You have the power to enforce laws. You can create crimes that people can commit. We like to talk about how the federal government is intrusive. We like to complain about the state government being intrusive. By far, the most intrusive form of government is local government. As I said, we tell people what color their houses can be. We tell them how big their houses, how small, how big their lot, how small. We tell people what kind of dogs they can own, how many dogs. We tell them where they can put their fences. We intrude into almost everyday activity of their lives in some way. We either intrude positively or negatively, and we coerce. The only way local government works is that we make people do things that they may not want to do. How can we run a garbage system? By making everybody pay whether they put their can out or not. How do we run a water system? By making everybody hook up once we run those lines in front of their house. How do we run a sewer system? By not letting people put a septic tank in their backyard when we run a sewer main in their front yard. We're coercive and we're intrusive. So you want to be careful when you exercise your power, because it affects people. There are some things that we need to do. There are some things that we'd like to do. There are some things that we have to do. So be limiting. Limit your temptations to what's necessary. Because remember, primarily we exist not to be in charge. We exist to provide services and to build communities. If you go too much on being in charge, then you tear down communities. Our general powers and duties are laid out in the municipal code. The legislature said these are the list of the things that we allow cities to do. One of that on the list has a general welfare clause. So it basically means this: you have the power to regulate, to legislate in any area where the legislature has not told you you can't, or in any area where the feds have not told you you can't, or where the state and the feds have done what we call preempt the field, taken the game. So a good example of that is we don't do our own Clean Air Acts. We couldn't pass a bill that says, by the way, we'll take dirtier air in Fairview than the national standards, because the feds have preempted that. The state has preempted that. There are certain overreaching kinds of things where the state thinks it's a statewide interest or the Fed thinks it's a countrywide interest. That's preemption. There are some things where the state says, we don't trust local government to do that, so we won't let you. But by and large, if it's not a subject matter where they say you can't do it, or where they're not already taken over the game, then you have the power to act in that area. So as I said, we can license dogs, we can quiet dogs, we can regulate the number of dogs, we can make it a crime to let your dog run at large, we can make it a crime to let your dog bark at night, but we can no longer make it a crime to own a pit bull, because a legislator decided that breed-specific laws are not your business. So we can regulate where a McDonald's goes, we can zone, we can put up sign ordinances, we can do all that, but a legislature said you can't control their drive-through and have an ordinance that says that they can't allow people to, there's a special drive-through thing. Yes?
So what would your thoughts be on the city's place in resolutions, such as resolutions for cities for the unborn?
Yeah, there's some cities that pass resolutions dealing with abortion and things like that. And it's an excellent question. What are my thoughts on that? My thoughts are this. We legislate through ordinances. We state policies and procedures and maybe positions on by resolution. There's a difference between resolutions and ordinances. There are some communities in the state, at the request of some people, have passed from time to time resolutions that just basically state, this is our position. So Highland passed one on abortion. I don't know who else has done it. My thought on that is, who am I to tell them how to waste their time? Laverkin once passed a resolution that said the United States ought to get out of the UN. Seemed like a waste of time to me. I think it wasn't Rockville, what's the other one? Virgin. Virgin passed a resolution that said that every home had to have a gun in it. It wasn't law, it wasn't anything, it was a resolution. We pass laws by ordinances. We state policies, you do things by resolutions. When you pass an ordinance, the ordinance has to be on the agenda. We'll talk about the open meetings law in a minute. The ordinance has to be in writing in front of you when you consider it. You can amend it, you can change it, but you can't just say, show up at a meeting and say, I got a good idea. Why don't we make those loud trucks illegal on Main Street? And somebody say, I concur, and you vote. You have to have an ordinance. You have to have something in front of you. You have to have a piece of paper. It's like a bill. It's presented some way. You consider it. You do it in a public meeting. You vote on it. If it gets 3 yes votes or 4 yes votes, depending on your community, it passes. It becomes law. Then it's the mayor's job or the city administrator's job or city manager's job to enforce the ordinance. Yes?
You're talking about some of the silly stuff that some cities do. Well, one of the things.
I'm not saying it's silly. I'm just saying it doesn't affect anything.
It's kind of comical. Our city has one where you have to have your dog on a leash if it's outside you and control your animal. Unless you're riding your horse, then you don't have to.
Yeah, well, that makes sense to me. How can you have a lease when you got your dog, your horse?
So your dog can run alongside the horse and run in and bite the neighbor and
Yeah.
you're fine.
I was once involved in a city where we were talking about shooting in city limits. Not hunting, just shooting and that. And by the time they debated and got through with it, we made it illegal to shoot in city limits. We made it illegal to shoot in city limits only in hunting season. All the rest of the time you could shoot all you wanted because of the problem with dogs chasing chickens. It turned out the problem wasn't people shooting their gun in the neighborhood. The problem is strangers coming in and killing their pheasants. But they solved that. Yes?
Elevation Township, I'm just curious, when the federal government or state government passes regulations, and you used the example
Yes.
in there, can a local organization pass more stringent requirements? I know you can't.
Sometimes, but not often. The question is, can we be more stringent than the feds? There are some where it's very specific and you can't, and there are some where you're allowed to go more stringent. So the Clean Air Act is a good thing, a good example of that. Salt Lake City has a no idling ordinance that goes towards clean air. They're not prevented from doing that because the feds don't have one. But Salt Lake City couldn't say, couldn't, for example, change certain other federal standards by getting tougher than them. Yes, sir.
So are we preempted from municipal property tax abatement?
No, yes. Let me just say there's a system of that. But if you wanted to give money back to a poor person who couldn't afford their local taxes, that's a different question. But where you are limited by the state is they may trust you to regulate dogs, but they don't trust you to regulate money. You're limited in the taxing power and the financing. You are limited in what taxes you can have, what fees you can charge, how they're established, how they're used. Money they control. There are some very specific things. So the question was, could we abate property tax? The answer is not really. The portion of the property tax that your resident pays that goes to you is probably in Tooele, you might pay $3,000 on your house in Tooele and $100 of that goes to Tooele City. So in theory, you could help out a poor person in Tooele in a roundabout way by saying, by the way, we'll come up with a system by which the poor aren't paying, we're rebating that portion. But the whole property tax, it'd be a nullity to most of the poor. And there is a poor person abatement at the county level and the state level where they can get it abated anyway. Okay. Ordinances have to be in writing, have to be on the agenda, have to be decorum, have to be done at a meeting. Let's talk about the Open and Public Meetings Act. It's a very important thing. All of council's businesses, the council business will be done in an open and public meeting. Individual council members may have individual duties, individual projects, but if it's council business, making policies, making procedures, it's got to be done in an open and public meeting. All governmental bodies, all are subject to what we call the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act. It applies to everybody the same. There's not a special one to cities and towns. There are some key things that you need to know about the Open Meetings Act. First and foremost is this. You need to know what a meeting is. Meeting is defined in the Act as the convening of a public body. And by the way, all of this is in this unreadable little handbook here. It's the convening of a public body by a person who has authority to convene the public body for the purposes for which the public body was created. So that's the definition of meeting. You need to know what a public body is. A public body is any body that is created by ordinance, statute, resolution, constitution that consists of 2 or more members, that is supported by public funds, and has the power to carry out or give advice on public duties. So, a public body is a quorum of that group. All of your councils are public bodies. All of your planning commissions are public bodies. Some of your committees may be public bodies if they're created officially by ordinance. Your town beautification committee can be a public body. Your history committee could be a public body. Your cemetery advisory committee could be a public body. It depends on how it was created, how many people on it, and what powers and duties you give them. So if a public body is convened into a meeting and a quorum is present, it is a meeting that needs to be open to the public. Fortunately, it is easy to comply with the open meetings law. In order to make a meeting open to the public, all you have to do is this. You have to have an agenda for that meeting. The agenda has to identify the date, time, and place of the meeting. The agenda has to identify what you plan to do at that meeting with certain specificity. The agenda has to be posted at least 24 hours before the meeting at the place of the meeting. You can post it in more places if you want, and most of your communities do. Your agenda or notice of the meeting has to be put on the public notice website. You'll have clerks and secretaries or whatever you call them in your body that know how to do that. And a copy of this notice and agenda has to be sent to a news media outlet. Not published in the newspaper. You can do that if you want. Just sent to the news media so that you can have the media cover you if you want. That's all you have to do to notice up an open meeting. The only other thing you have to do to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act is have your doors open and allow the public to show up and watch you meet. There's no requirement that you allow public participation. You can if you want. There's no requirement that you allow them to disrupt the meeting. You can if you want. All that's required is that if you're getting together as a quorum for the purposes for which you were elected, that it be noticed, the agenda be present, and the doors open, and the public get to come in and watch you meet.
Lehigh, Utah. So you do have to have the media involved somehow, or like?
You have to let them know about the meeting.
About the meeting. Does social media count?
Media means not social media. Media means the press. It means
So the press has to know about any of the public meetings?
you have to send it to a newspaper in your location. Now, or any other press that wants to know about it, you just politely send it to them. Most of them get on the email thing. Most of them check on the public notice website. But social media is not the press.
So the social, or sorry, the, what is it? The, open, sorry, you said something that caught me off guard and I can't remember, I apologize.
I have that effect on people. I catch them off guard and then I apologize later.
Okay, so, so it has to be presented to the media. What if they don't do that? Is it not?
Then it's not properly noticed and it's not a proper public meeting, and we'll talk about the penalties and the results of that.
And so then, sorry, we should have it, okay. So then, if they post, if your city posts it on like their website, does that count? Or no, it has to be going to the
Well,
press?
you're encouraged to post it on your own website,
Okay.
but the minimum requirements are post the notice at your place of the meeting, post the notice on the public notice website.
Does that count? That's the one, that's the question.
You have to post it on the state public notice website, and you have to send a notice to your local news media outlet
Separate, okay.
that wants. Yes, sir.
Holiday City, can the city council expand the notice requirements beyond the minimum? In other words,
Yes.
require more than 24 hours? And
Yes.
Have there been cities in Utah that have done that?
Most cities in Utah expand it beyond that. Most cities in Utah, not necessarily by formal ordinance or action, post in 3 or more places and put it on their own websites and mail it out to more people, allow email lists where it automatically goes out to those who request the email list. Most cities go beyond that. But to comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act, the minimum is those things. Then all that you need to do is allow the public to come in and watch you meet. Most of you will have adopted meeting procedures. You're required to have adopted meeting procedures for your planning commission and your city council. Those meeting procedures can be whatever procedures you want, but there's copies of those procedures are supposed to be available to the public at the meeting. Most of you will have meeting procedures that have allow some level of public participation in your meetings. Either a public comment portion or something like that, or some of you have traditions and customs where it's more like a town hall and less like a church meeting, and it's just open forum where everybody yells at each other. All that's fine. It's not required by the open meetings law. All that's required by the open meetings law is that the public come in and watch you meet. The open meetings law requires that all of your deliberations and your decisions be done in the public meeting. Decisions is easy. I don't know what it means to deliberate. I think I do. But the hard thing is, what is deliberation outside the meeting? If 3 of you on a council are getting together to talk about a matter before the meeting, you're violating the open meetings law, in my opinion. You're deliberating. Yes?
What if there is a committee, I'm from Provo City, what if there's a committee with 3 council members and various community members? It's not publicly noticed. Is that in violation of OPA?
It's only a violation depending on how that committee was created and how it's supported and what duties it has. Because a public body can be any committee or any group created by resolution, ordinance, or whatever that has supported by public money and is invested with powers and duties. So, how is the committee an ad hoc committee meeting once, or is the committee a long-going committee created by some resolution? Does the committee have any power? I don't know. Each one is signed as separate. I can tell you that the only time I've seen a court deal with that is, and I'll give you this example, it's from a school district thing years ago, I think up here, Davis County, I think it was. They're talking about opening a new high school. And of course, high school boundaries are controversial. Everybody shows up to argue where they're going to draw the boundaries, because I grew up wearing orange and yellow or brown and yellow, and by damn, my kids aren't going to go to a school that doesn't have that as their colors, so don't draw that boundary where I don't want it. So the school board thought the best thing to do was, rather than holding these big public meetings in front of us about where the boundaries would be, we will appoint a committee. And we'll take the heat out of it by putting a few parents on it, a board member on it, staff members, and they'll go off and meet, and they will make a recommendation to us. And they took the position that was not a public body. Now, the parents who weren't appointed to that committee took the position they ought to be able to go to that meeting and argue. And so they sued in district court. And the district court judge looked at it and said, all right, it's got more than 2 people. They've given them some power. They created it by official resolution. It's a public body, got to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. Let the public come in. Let them watch you meet. So if your committee's more like that and less like some kind of ad hoc one-off thing where you go out to decide, make a recommendation on cemetery flowers one time, then yeah, it's not a meeting. Yes?
You mentioned 3 council members being a hurdle, but for Provo and anybody with
4,
7 council,
yeah.
you'd be talking 4. So 3 council.
Quorum, I should say quorum. Yes?
During this period of time when we're all training, Park City, sorry, are there any restrictions for an elected official who's not sworn in?
No.
So that doesn't count?
Then you're not a member of the body till they swear you in. But by the way, there are exceptions to the meeting thing. First and foremost, the meeting has to be convened, called by the person who's in charge of calling those kind of meetings. Second, Meeting does not include any purely social occasion. Third, chance meeting. You run into each other in the food aisle at Kroger's isn't a meeting. So if 3 of your council members are sitting here together today, this is not a meeting of your council. It wasn't convened by your council. You're not here for your council business. It's a meeting of the league, but yes.
Provo, my last agency, some of our council members got caught doing a Facebook meeting. They would call each other. One
Yeah.
would call one, and the other one would call
Yeah.
one. Third one would call back one to set the vote.
Very difficult thing, yeah.
Well, they got caught because they started doing an email.
Yeah.
That's still illegal, right? I mean,
Now, excellent question. He's talking about electronic communications outside the meeting site. Remember, the Open and Public Meetings Act was written to apply to all members, to all public bodies, including the state legislature, counties, and all that. And they all have cell phones, they all have text messages, they all do things. So when the electronic communication kind of access came up, everybody was being accused of violating the Open and Public Meetings Act because they were all emailing each other, they're all texting each other, they're all on Facebook together at the same time, they're all doing that thing. So the legislature has put in the Open and Public Meetings Act a definition of electronic communications now that includes email, text messaging, that kind of things. And it has specifically said that nothing in the Open and Public Meetings Act shall be construed to make it illegal for members of the body to communicate with each other by electronic communications outside the public meeting. So I can no longer tell people that that it is a violation to send out emails to everybody or to text everybody. I do know that if you all get on a telephone together at the same time in a conference call and talk about it, you are convening a meeting and deliberating outside the meeting. I can't tell you that if you all just do an email chain that you are. The key to the Open and Public Meetings Act is remember the spirit of the act and the purpose of the act is transparency. The policy of the state of Utah is that we be transparent in both our deliberations and the decisions that we make. A lot of the compliance is going to be up to you. You will know when you're cheating. So don't. I like to tell people that getting elected to public office, it's voluntary, you know. You chose this. It's like joining a nudist camp, then showing up and complaining because people aren't wearing enough clothes. You've joined the nudist camp now. You've got to show off your goods. If you're going to vote against somebody, you do it in front of him. If you're going to make a hard decision, you do it in front of him. If you're going to deliberate, you do it in front of him. Why hide it? If you feel like you need to hide the deliberations and the decisions, then you're in the wrong business.
You're talking about Atma, but the reality of the emails is grammar comes into play. And
You get caught.
you go that way.
Yeah, people will accuse you of it even if you're not wrong. You'll get tarred and feathered. You can say, well, technically I can do this. Well, technically you could, but if you get caught deliberating and deciding outside the public meeting, and as I say, the deciding is easy to know when you're doing that. The deliberating is hard. Now, no one can tell you that 2 of you getting together is a violation. No one can tell you that the mayor and 2 getting together in a 6-member council form is a violation. It isn't. It may be a skirt around. Nobody can tell you that 3 council members in Provo getting together is a violation, because it isn't. It may be a skirt around, but you will know if you're cheating. Yes?
Question with the closed meetings.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to. Closed meetings. All meetings start as a public meeting. Some portions of public meetings may be closed. We sometimes call those executive sessions. No meeting ever starts as a closed meeting. All meetings start as an open meeting. You may close a portion of your open meeting for very specific reasons, following a very specific procedure. In order to close a meeting, a motion must be made. The purpose for closing the meeting must be stated for the minutes. A vote must be taken of the council. The vote must be a 2/3 vote of the council members. The public meeting minutes must reflect the vote of each council member on whether they voted or to close or didn't vote, so it's just not an all ayes. The meeting, it has to say who voted and why. If you meet those criteria, you can close that portion of the meeting, which means that the public gets excluded and you get to invite in only the people who are necessary for that purpose. The reasons for which you can close a meeting are limited. They're laid out in the state code. They're intended to be limitations, not descriptions. If it's not one of those things, you don't get to close it. It's not those things and those things like unto it. The state code says that you may close a portion of your meeting to talk about a person's character, competency, mental, physical health. That makes sense. Why would you want to talk about a person's private stuff in public? You can close a meeting to talk about strategy on collective bargaining. Some of you may bargain with your employees, most of you don't. You may close a meeting to talk about strategy on pending or imminently threatened litigation. You want to meet with your lawyer, you want to meet in private. You want to decide, should we settle or shouldn't we settle? That makes sense. You get to close a meeting to do that. You can close a meeting to talk about the purchase or sale of real property or water rights or that kind of thing, when the purpose of closing is to make sure that the public gets the best price or pays the least amount for the public good. That makes sense. You can close a meeting to talk about the deployment of security devices. Here's the code to the front door. You wouldn't want to talk about that in an open meeting. And you can close a meeting to talk about ongoing criminal investigations. There are other things in the statute that allow certain public bodies to close meetings. They don't apply to you. That's basically the only reasons you can close a meeting. In a closed meeting, you may not approve an ordinance, resolution, appointment, contract. You can talk about it, you can decide what you're going to do, you can hold a vote. You don't have to hold a vote to decide on strategy of some sort, but you may not finally approve any of those things in a closed meeting. Yes?
So with those items that you just stated, the reasons for a closed meeting, would it need to be made public in that public meeting, that that's what's going to be discussed in the closed meeting?
Well, depending on how well the motion is stated, people might learn what you're talking about, but the key is they're not going to learn the substance of what you say. Yes?
In the closed meeting, is that recorded, or do you stop the recording?
Excellent question. All public meetings are recorded. All closed meetings have another recording. The only exception is the closed meetings, you do not have to record discussions that include the deployment of security devices or when you're talking about a person. People have long learned that the presence of a recording device inhibits frank discussion when you're talking about somebody, because my experience is eventually everyone hears what's on the tape. And so if you're talking about a person, you don't have to have the recording. If you're giving people the code to the front door, you don't have to have a recording. In those cases, you have to have an affidavit signed by the chair of the meeting saying, I swear the only thing we talked about in this was these things. Yes?
Are we in closed meetings, are we required to do meeting minutes separate from the public meeting minutes?
You could, but you're not required to. Your meeting minutes, you have to have a separate tape. And the minutes of the public meeting need to include the purpose for which you closed it, the vote to close it, and those who are in attendance in the closed meeting and those who aren't. Other than that, it's just the recording. All of your meetings are recorded. The recordings are, other than the closed meetings, the recordings of your public meetings are public documents available to the public within 3 days from the meeting. So 3 days after every public meeting, someone should have the right to go in without cost, without charge, to listen to that meeting. All of your meetings require minutes. The Open and Public Meetings Act defines what has to be included in the minutes. All minutes, even draft minutes, are public documents. Your minutes of your council meetings must be available within 30 days from the meeting. They must be available in final form to the public at least 3 days after they're finally approved. So, Alpine City Council meeting holds a meeting. Within 3 days from that, Judy Piquel ought to be able to go on her computer and find a copy on the Alpine website, because they post them, and listen to the meeting. Within 30 days from that meeting, she ought to be able to walk down to the Alpine City Hall and say to Charmaine, I'd like to see a copy of your draft minutes that you've been typing up. Within 3 days from when the Alpine City Council formally approves those minutes, no matter however they do it, she ought to be able to go in and say, or go on the state website and say, here is the final official copy of the minutes. Your planning commission doesn't have to meet the 30 days, your other public bodies. Yes?
Question that often comes up in all forms of government is what needs to be in the minutes?
How detailed.
How detailed, yes.
Open Meetings Act covers that too. The minimum detail is you have to have the substance, not a transcription, of what members of the council say. You have to have the actual vote by council member name on every vote. If you invite a member of the public to speak, you have to have their name, their address, and the substance, not a transcription, of what they said. You may, but aren't required to, meet the requirements of that substance by providing a link in your written minutes to some kind of recording where you have the actual thing. But that's the minimum requirements for the meeting minutes. Most of us do more than that. Yes, Mayor?
Is there a requirement between draft minutes and final assignment? You mentioned 30 days for draft.
There isn't a requirement between draft and final that I recall, but you've got to have 30 minutes, within 30 days, you've got to have the draft out for the public for your council meetings. So like Metro Township, like Joe's, he meets once a month, and so I'm sure what's happening is the minutes are being drafted as we speak, the recording's available right now. The next meeting's going to be more than 30 days when they vote to approve it, but so there won't be approved minutes until after that next meeting, and then it's going to be done. Yes?
Not frequently with Springville City, is there any kind of discussion going on or rules that would apply to having our council meetings or public meetings streamed?
There's no requirement that you stream them now. Many communities are starting to do that, even Vineyard's starting to stream. I've never looked at it. My experience is this, and some of you, and you should think about it. Once we started to record, my behavior in the meetings improved. And so should yours. I used to just be flippant and say anything and people then, but you know, because it never appeared in the minutes. But now it appears in the recordings. Once they start streaming, I've noticed councils behave better, they dress better, they don't embarrass themselves as much, and in theory, if you keep reminding them that this is being recorded and streamed, we're all more professional. I was in a meeting once where a mayor and council squared off at each other behind the podium and almost came to blows. None of the other council members stepped in between them. They were interested in seeing who was going to win. Eventually, the fat guy backed down. But streaming would have prevented that, you would hope. Yes?
How about posting the minutes?
Posting the minutes?
Is there a requirement?
Yes. Once your minutes are done, they're posted on the public notice website. You're encouraged to put them on your own website. They're public documents. You want everybody to know how brilliant you are. Okay, let's talk about enforcement of the Open and Public Meetings Act. It's enforced in two ways. Attorney General and the county attorney are charged with direct enforcement. Intentional violations of the Open Public Meetings Act can be seen as a crime. I've never known anybody to be charged as a crime, but if you blatantly violate it, you could be charged as a crime, and it's a misdemeanor. The real enforcement is this. Back to the question here from Lehigh. If you do something, pass something, make a final decision on something, and it wasn't properly on the agenda, it wasn't properly posted, it wasn't properly done in the open and public meetings, that action is voidable. It's not that it's void, it's voidable. If someone challenges that action within 90 days from when it last occurred, and it's true that you didn't follow the act, the judge will throw it out and you'll have to redo it again. That doesn't mean that if they didn't do something right a year ago, that you can now go say it's void. 90 days is a hard cutoff. So voidable within 90 days. If no one challenges it, it's still effective. Yes?
You may be covering this in a minute, but you were talking about streaming and internet. And I'm just curious, are there any rules laid out by the legislature for virtual attendance meetings?
Yet electronic meetings are allowed. Virtual attendance is allowed. I'm glad you asked that, which means this. Your council can, by ordinance, pass an ordinance that says we will allow for electronic meetings virtual attendance. You can, in that ordinance, you will make a decision. Does a quorum have to be present at the anchor location? Are we going to have multiple ones? How much notice do you have to give us before we have virtual attendance? If you pass the ordinance and a council member or multiple council members meet the criteria in your ordinance, they can say, I'm not going to be there, I'm going to attend virtually. Or in theory, you could have a thing where all your meetings were virtual if you passed a liberal enough ordinance. All that's required is you have to have an anchor location identified for each meeting. The public has to be invited in. You have to have sufficient equipment where the public can both hear and participate in the meeting. With the modern equipment, these work out pretty well. With the old call-in on the telephone, they were terrible and they never worked. But I've been to meetings where 1 or 2 council members have been Skyped in on a screen, you know, or they go to the meeting and you see 2 or 3 people there, and it works out good if you're willing to spend enough money for enough equipment. Yes?
A lot of questions about new media. Are there any issues related to council members talking to the public on town social media pages?
No. Other than you want to be polite, you don't want to say things that are outside your area, and you don't want to libel and slander people. No, no. That electronic communication outside the meeting, that the key is this. You will know if you're cheating. Are you deliberating on something? Are you deciding something? Yes.
So backing up to that, if there's a Facebook, I think I know what you're saying, if there's a Facebook status update and you have 3 council members commenting on it with the public, is that's good?
If they're just commenting or if they're just saying, that's good.
So no decisions, obviously, or no deliberation.
If you're not deliberating or deciding.
Okay, great.
If you're not going offline, some kind of secret thing and saying, let's all get together at 2:30 on my Facebook page and talk about how we're going to vote on this so we don't spend all night arguing in front of the city council, then you're deliberating and deciding. Okay, let's talk about ethics. Ethics goes right into the Open Public Meetings Act. Ethics is one of the most important subjects that we'll discuss today. You ought to think about ethics. Where it applies in the Open Public Meetings Act is this. Closed portions of meetings are protected information. You agree to sit in a closed portion of the meeting, listen to comments, listen to the discussion, and then share what was said in that closed portion of that meeting, you're violating the Ethics Act. It's not up to you to decide what was said in the closed meeting goes to the public or not. It's up to the body to decide that. The Ethics Act, we're all subject now that you've been elected or you participate in local government, you're subject to what we call the Municipal Officers and Employees Ethics Act. This is a minimum standard. This Ethics Act does 2 main things. First, it creates crimes that you can now commit that you couldn't have committed before you took office. And second, it sets forth a minimum level of disclosure for conflicts of interest. That's all the Ethics Act does. You are allowed as a city to have a more stringent Ethics Act if you want. But you are not allowed to ignore, or nor should you, the minimum provisions of the Municipal Officers and Employees Ethics Act. By the way, I've trained a lot on the Ethics Act. I apologize to those you've heard me say this before. I think about this a lot. Politicians are the only people that have lawyers train them on ethics. I mean, what does that say about you? Having a lawyer train you on ethics is like having the nuns teach sex education. It's not that we don't know the rules, it's just that we lack practical experience. And so when I say this is the minimum act, this is the minimum. These are the crimes that you can commit. First, it is a crime, as we said, to disclose private, protected, confidential information that you acquire as part of your position to, in a manner that secures special privileges for yourself or others. So the information that you receive that is not public information, if you disclose it to someone else for their benefit, or you disclose it to somebody else for your benefit, it's a violation of the Ethics Act. And if it's for your financial benefit or one of your friends' financial benefits, you could go to jail. It's a crime. Yes?
So I have a question. So we kind of had a controversial situation that happened in our city, and I've always wondered what the outcome of this would have been. We had a city council member who, when it came time for the, the school board to reassign boundaries, this council member had inside information, shared it with his wife, who shared it with the school, and trickle effect or whatever, and eventually it had an impact on the boundaries. Now,
Right.
How would that be? Is that like, is he breaking the law, or do they have to have proof of that to be able to show that? Because
Right.
it was.
Her question was, council member learned something in a closed session dealing with school district boundaries, for those of you who couldn't hear. Council member innocently pillow talks a little with his wife and shares this information. Wife, not knowing that it may not be shared, shares it with other people who share it with other people. It eventually gets back to the school board, and it eventually affects the school board's decision of what happened. First, it's unethical to share that information. Probably not a crime because there was no financial pocketbook thing, but certainly not ethical. Let me give you an example of problems that can occur, dilemmas that you may have. And this is, as far as I know, a true example. And the reason why I say that is because, my memory's not what it used to be, and I like to elaborate on things. Guy goes in a city council meeting. They're talking about acquiring a piece of property to widen a road. Need the corner. Appropriately close the meeting to discuss, what are we willing to pay? What's the appraisal? What do we think? And they say, our appraisal is corner's worth $100,000. Probably costs us $20,000 to condemn it in attorney fees and appraiser costs. Why don't we offer the 100, but be prepared to go to 125 if they reject it? And they decide to do that. Very common kind of discussion. And the guy thinks to himself, wait a minute. The guy that owns that property is my friend. He's my neighbor. Someone ought to tell him, don't take that first offer.
That's horrible.
Someone ought to tell him, say no, you'll get an extra 25. Who's going to tell him that? What a dilemma.
Is it though?
My friend is going to get beat out of an extra $25,000 if he says yes to this offer. Here's the appraisal. We will pay you the appraised amount. Do you think it's unethical to whisper in the guy's ear, say no, hold out?
Yes, absolutely.
It's absolutely unethical because your job is to represent the best interests of the city, not that individual. But think how bad you feel knowing that your friend could have picked up some extra money. Another example. Similar thing. We're going to condemn to put a road through. Here's where the road's going to go. We're going to offer the guy. Council member thinks to himself, when that road goes through, that's going to create good commercial frontage across the way. That piece of ground's for sale right now. If I buy it now, I can get it for today's price, and when the road goes through, it's going to be worth much more. Property was for sale anyway. He's in the business of buying property. He knows a road is planned that no one else right now knows. If he goes and makes the offer and buys the property, he's committed a crime. The first example, the guy's been unethical, for sure. The second example, the guy's committed a crime. He's used information that he acquired by his position to line his pocket. Okay, second thing that's a crime. You cannot use or attempt to use your official position to line your own pocket or get special privileges for yourself or others. Can't sell your vote. Can't use your possession to get favors. You can't, if you get stopped by the police officer, show your card and say, I'm on the city council, can't we waive this? Third, you can't knowingly receive, accept, take, seek, or solicit directly or indirectly for yourself or others a gift of substantial value or substantial economic benefit that is given to you to influence you in making your decisions, or that is given to you as a reward for a decision you made for them. Can't line your own pocket, you can't sell your vote. Now, the exceptions to that last one is that you can accept campaign donations, you can accept public awards, you can accept non-pecuniary gifts that are worth less than $50. So, lunch, if it's worth less than $50, but never any cash. Nothing more than $50 if it's given to you to influence you in your position. Yes, Mayor.
How long before or after the campaign can you continue to accept donations?
If you're planning to run, you can accept them forever, and they go, campaign donations have to go in the campaign fund, you know all the rules to keep you from misusing it. And then if you don't run, that campaign fund goes to another campaign or a nonprofit, so it never goes in your own pocket, theoretically. So let me give you an example, true story. City manager calls me. He said, Dave, I've got an ethics question. I said, good, what is it? He says, the local bank, Zions, wants to take me to a jazz game. I said, great, it's nice to have friends in the banking business. And he said, no, it's not my friend. I don't even know him. We have our money in Wells Fargo. He wants to do business with us. I'm the guy that makes that decision. He's invited me to a jazz game. I said, oh, that's a problem. He wants to give you a gift to influence you in making a public decision. So I said, fine, as long as it's not worth more than $50. And he said, oh, that's a problem. These are good seats. These are right down by Senator so-and-so and, you know, and banker so-and-so. These are, you know, I can hear Jerry Sloan swear, you know, from these seats. I said, well, everybody can hear that, you know. I said, no, it's worth more than $50. You can't take it. He said, but he's invited me and my son really wants to go to the game. And so I said to him, well, who are they playing? And he said, Charlotte Bobcats. And I said, hell, that's not worth more than $50. Go. But that's the kind of dilemma you get. He doesn't believe that he'd be influenced. The banker believes he would be. Why else would the banker ask you? All right, let's talk about the disclosure portion. You know the crimes. You don't tell secrets. You don't sell your vote. You don't use your position to line your own pockets. Those are the crimes. The ethics, the disclosure of these. All of you go into office with conflicts of interest. I know that because you live in the communities that you represent. You zone your own property. You set your own water rates. You set your own property tax. You license your own dogs. You come into it with conflicts of interest. Some conflicts of interest must be disclosed formally and to the public. Those conflicts of interest are these. If you own a business or your family owns a business that is regulated by your community, you must disclose that on a formal disclosure. If you own a business or your family owns a business that is doing business with the community, you must disclose that on a formal disclosure. If you have other personal conflicts of interest that conflict with your public duties, my son works for the city. My wife is an advocate for no growth in the valley. Things like that. You know, my wife sits on the No More Small Houses in This Town, God damn it, committee. You disclose that. And I apologize for swearing. My wife is in favor of small houses. That's all. If anybody asks, she's one of those, as she's gotten older, she's got to be decided that she's got hers and now she can feel sorry for the poor. And I admire her for it. Those have to be disclosed. They're disclosed in writing, they're given to your mayor, they're public documents, everybody knows about it. And then you must also disclose them in public if the issue comes up in a public meeting. So for example, you own the dry cleaner, it has a business license. You see on the agenda, increase in business license fees. You've previously disclosed that. You come to that part on the agenda, you say, council and public, I want to remind all you guys, you're increasing business license fees. I have a business license. You're increasing my business license fee. I have a conflict of interest. I want everybody to know that. You have now met the disclosure requirements. There is nothing in the law that requires you to recuse yourself or not participate in the discussion or not vote. If you feel like you shouldn't, then don't. If you feel like you should, no one should stop you. When they voted for you, they knew you were a business owner. When they voted for you, they knew that you were an advocate for low business license fees. When you ran, you probably said, I'm tired of these high business license fees. I'm going to vote against them. So vote if you want to. Or you might say, this is too personal, it affects my pocketbook, I'm not going to vote. Yes?
Does it matter if it's before or after?
The disclosure? All disclosure should be before, and a disclosure should be the vote. But yeah, it matters from an ethics standpoint. The idea is conflicts of interest should be known to the public. Yes?
How general or limited the application? Like, for example, if by virtue of raising the water rates, everybody's water rates.
Exactly.
Business licensing, maybe it's a
Everybody.
smaller application, right?
Exactly. And so you're going to have to decide. If it is personal conflict limited to only you and your family, my advice is don't participate in it. If the issue is the corner lot owned by council member so-and-so needs to be condemned for a new road, you ought to stay out of that one. Or the field owned by the council member's family should be rezoned to large lot residential. You ought to stay out of that. You ought to stay out of the ones that are financial to you personally, only you, you know. If it's for everybody in the community it affects, but if it's just your own, you ought to stay out of it. But the law only requires disclosure. Now, the disclosure provisions do not cure the criminal conduct. You can't disclose that I'm going to sell my vote and then sell your vote and not be accused of a crime. Does that make sense? Yes.
What about nonprofits?
What about them?
Still a conflict of interest?
It depends on what you're doing with the nonprofit. If the nonprofit lets you, if you're zoning the nonprofit's property, or you work for a nonprofit and they're doing something, there may be a conflict. If the nonprofit's got a contract with the city to do something, the key is not the form of the business, not how it's owned. The key is, do I own a business that's regulated by my community? Do I own a business that's doing business with my community? Do I have a conflict that's personal to me that conflicts with my public duties? If you do, you disclose those. Okay, let me talk about how the Ethics Act should be enforced. There's provision in the Ethics Act that says that creates a state ethics commission that is available. If you think somebody is violating the Ethics Act, you can turn them into the state ethics commission. There's a provision in there that says if you don't want to use the state ethics commission, you can create your own ethics commission. What you should not do is use the Ethics Act as a tool to bludgeon your political opponents to get your own way. If you honestly believe someone has a conflict of interest that should keep them from participating and voting on something, then you file it appropriately to the appropriate authorities and you protect that person's rights to due process so that some independent people can investigate it and make the decision. The Ethics Act should not be used as a way of cowing your opponents into voting or not voting on something you care about. If you care enough about a subject matter to accuse your friend on the council of being unethical, then perhaps you should recuse yourself if you care that much. People have you have a right to say, I think he's unethical, but you don't have a right to say that publicly for improper purposes. You should say it privately to the people who investigate it and let them say it publicly if you're right. Does that make sense? There's nothing more fair, more unfair than the public accusation made in social media that someone is being unethical simply because you're afraid they're going to vote in favor of rezoning somewhere in town that you're against. That's the most common one. He's a contractor, he's in favor of houses, he's only voting for this because he's in the business, he's unethical. Any questions about the Ethics Act? Any questions generally about powers, duties, forms of government, or any of the other things I was assigned to cover? Yes?
I don't know if this really has anything to do with anything, but every year my daughter and I, for the last 11 years, have done a fundraiser for the West Shore Animal Shelter.
Yes. Feel free. She says every year her daughter and her do fundraisers for the West Jordan Animal Shelter. And my response is good.
Okay. No conflict?
No conflict to do it. Now, there could be a conflict if the city decided to rezone the property and chase the animal shelter out, and and you'd say, I'm in that, then you'd decide. Let me just say in closing this, as I said, I've represented cities, towns, metro townships since 1980. My whole career has been representing local governments. I'm proud to say that I've done that. I'm proud of what they've done. I'm proud of the cities, even the ones that have fired me. It's been an honor to be your attorney. You are the group, as I say, that make communities worth living in. Like the old logo that we used to have is, our role is to make life better. And you do that. You are the people that bring clean water to the houses and take the dirty water away. You make the roads safe. You're the reason why when people dial 911, somebody shows up. You're the reason why my sons, when they were raised, felt like their hometown was South Jordan. You create the festivals. You pay for the parades. You make life worth living in your community. You can be proud of that. Keep it up. Remember that first and foremost, we're not here to tell people what they can do in their backyard. We're not here to stop growth. We're not here to fight with developers. We're not here to fight with our neighbors, first and foremost. We may end up doing that. First and foremost, we're here to provide services to our neighbors. And secondly, to build and to preserve a sense of community. You're building hometowns that people can go home to. And that's a wonderful thing to do. No one can go home to Lark. No one goes home to Crescent. Hopefully they can go home to Magna. Hopefully they can go home to Alpine and Fairview. And that's what you'll do. And it's a wonderful thing to do, and you should be proud of it. You should be proud of it even if a bunch of strangers move in and build small houses. It'll be their hometown too. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking so long, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.